Good morning. Y'all in the right place? Yeah? So a man walks into my office, someone I recognize as a man of his word who does what he says he's going to do. Man walks into my office and he has a gun. And the man says, "Now, Dave, what I'd like for you to do is take all the furniture here in your office and move it out into the waiting room, or else I'm going to shoot you." So as students of human behavior, what's the outcome you predict here? What am I going to do? Yeah, I can do that. I'll move the furniture and I live. A week goes by, the man returns, same man, same gun, and he says, "Now, Dave, what I'd like for you to do is sing the Star-Spangled Banner. The first verse will be sufficient. Sing the Star-Spangled Banner, or else I'm going to shoot you." What's the outcome you predict here? Sing. Yeah, I can do that. Anybody can do that. I sing and I live. Week goes by, once again the man returns, and this time he brings a colleague with him. And the colleague rolls in a cart full of electronic equipment. And the man says, "Now, Dave, my colleague here, he's got lie detecting equipment. The best electronics on the planet for detecting human emotion, virtually infallible. I'm going to ask my colleague to hook you up to the lie detecting equipment. And then I just want you to relax, or else I'm going to shoot you." So what's the outcome you predict here? Yeah, nothing good is coming out of this. And that's the circumstance of millions of Americans who wake up day after day hoping not to be panicking, struggling not to be panicking, and all the while find themselves dug in deeper and deeper in panic trouble as a result of all their anti-panic efforts. There's something funny about that. The funniness of the harder I try not to have something, the more I get it. And a treatment of panic disorder that incorporates that and builds that in, not just thematically, but in the context of specific interventions, adds a lot of power to any kind of exposure treatment. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. I've done so many panic workshops over the years, and they all had humor between the lines, and by reference, this is the first time I think I've set out to just let's talk about how we can use humor in the treatment. You can treat panic without any humor, but it's kind of like having a tooth drilled without anesthesia. Why would you bother? Why would you bother? This is going to make it get down so much better. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how humor can be so helpful. Mention just briefly some theoretical ideas to explain why this might be so, and then give you examples of interventions, ways of figuring out what the client might find funny about this and ways to utilize that. And hopefully that'll give you enough of an idea that you can then start to create these on your own. So speakers are supposed to give you a financial disclosure slide, conflict of interest slide. Here's my financial disclosure slide. I've written some books, and if you buy them, I will make money. You got to know that. I don't know if people are still doing elevator speeches. This was a big thing for a while, but this is my elevator speech. This is my mission statement. This is an idea that I want to get to in an intake session with a client. My practice, what I do, I help people who are afraid of stuff that tends not to happen. Something ironic about that. I want to get that on the table right away. I want people to recognize, if they haven't already, well, what kind of work I do here. This is a subversive idea. It's a paradoxical statement, and it helps a client come to the point more quickly. I treat panic disorder. I don't treat death disorder. I don't treat fainting disorder. I don't treat losing my mind and going crazy and losing control of myself in the middle of the shopping mall disorder. I treat panic disorder, and that's what we want to get right to. And this is the start of noticing and accepting that funny part that, geez, when I oppose this, I seem to make it worse. There's something inherently funny about that, and if they can notice it and then start to use it, they're going to be much further along in the treatment. So the treatment of panic disorder, this is not rocket science. And I don't mean about smart or dumb. I mean about being precise and sure. If you're going to launch a rocket to Mars, you better be real precise and real sure about everything. Not so with panic disorder. The effort to be sure, the effort to be so precise, the effort to make sure I have 17 coping techniques lined up that will protect me at all times, that's more part of the problem than it is the solution. So we're going to talk about the fact that this is an exposure treatment that the client has come for and we're going to do. If exposure is the solution, this is something I want people to think about. If exposure is the solution, what does that tell me about the problem? Because after all, we don't do exposure treatment for charging elephants or rabid dogs. We do exposure treatment for issues and problems that we can see in advance are not particularly dangerous. Don't do exposure treatment for runaway buses. So we're going to follow the basics of an exposure and a cognitive behavioral approach, but I'm specifically going to try and help the client not to take the content of the thoughts and the interpretations of the various symptoms not too seriously, not to get wrapped up in the ideas of overcoming and managing and coping with and protecting against, because that lends credibility to the implied threat, which we already have seen, gee, that threat is empty. That's what makes this a panic disorder and not a death disorder. So we're going to try and benefit from the client's early recognition that the apparent threat is a mirage. And without eliciting their resistance, without hitting them over the head with it, without trying hard to restructure their thoughts, we just want to help them treat that like a mirage. So the problem of panic attacks is a terribly serious problem in the way it disrupts people's lives. The solution does not have to continue to take that serious note. So this is not your grandfather's cognitive behavioral therapy, what I'm going to be talking to you about today. Prior to the pandemic, I was taking my workshop around the country, mostly for PESI workshops. And a typical workshop, I'd go to a hotel and we'd all be in a common area, and there'd be the Knights of Columbus was having a workshop, and somebody was having a workshop on depression or schizophrenia, and they'd be driving instructors union workshop, all these workshops lined up. And here I was with my anxiety workshop. And something very interesting would happen. People would wander down the line looking at the various workshops, and they always stopped at anxiety and would say something like, oh, this is the workshop I need. They'd come by and kind of giggle about it. They didn't do that at the depression workshop. They didn't do that for the Knights of Columbus or the car drivers union. Every time they would come by and giggle and make some kind of humorous remark about the anxiety workshop. There's something funny about panic and anxiety, and if we can help the client tap into it, that's going to be terribly useful. And if we shy away from it, we're going to be missing out on a lot of resources that could otherwise help the client. So let me touch briefly, very briefly, on some theoretical ideas about humor and anxiety and how they apply to panic attacks. Here's what Freud, if you want to make a case, you always bring out Freud. Here's what Freud had to say about humor and anxiety. That he viewed it as a kind of economy in the expenditure of energy. An economy in the expenditure of energy on realizing that this thought, feeling that I had doesn't add up to what I feared. And the surplus, that energy that I was gearing up to protect myself, the surplus of that energy gets released in laughter. That was his perspective, the release of energy on coming to realize that thought was a mirage. Immanuel Kant, we're going to go to him. Laughter arises from a sudden transformation of a strained expectation into nothing. And what's the strained expectation here? What if I die? What if I go crazy? What if I stop breathing? And so on. Well, that's what happens when a client stays with the panic and walks through it. that strained expectation of all those calamities ends up to be revealed as nothing. And there's the laugh. If we could help them anticipate that laugh and get to the funny bit a little sooner, it's going to make things much easier for them. More recently, we can look at the inhibitory learning model, the work of Michelle Krask. She talks about structuring exposure to create what she calls expectancy violations, where the outcome is different from what the client expected and yields an alternate, surprising emotional response. So here she's looking to exposure to supply not so much anxiety reduction, but a different emotional reaction to the exposure task, something surprising. And you know what? Nothing is more surprising and comforting and relieving than a good belly laugh on coming to realize, no, this one didn't kill me either. So that's what we're shooting for. So how does this fit with models of panic? Well, I think it fits really, really well. My model of working with panic is that panic is essentially a trick. People literally get tricked by a panic attack. In this sense, they experience discomfort. They treat it like danger. That's the panic trick. They experience discomfort and treat it like danger. They do that in advance when they're anticipating. They do that in the moment when they're actively having a panic attack. And so they get tricked, in this sense, into doing precisely what would be unhelpful. Because what's good for danger? Well, we've got the traditional fight, flight, and freeze. If it looks stronger than me, I'll run away from it. And if it looks weaker than me, I'll fight it. And if it looks stronger than me and faster than me, I'll freeze and hope it doesn't see so good. That's all we got for danger: fight, flight, and freeze. And what do we have for discomfort? Pretty much the opposite of fight, flight, and freeze. Go back to Claire Weeks with float. Float through the anxiety, float through the panic. It's less important precisely what you do when it turns out this isn't threatening. When you think it's threatening, when you believe in the threat, that's when you supply fight and flight, and that's when you add to the anxiety rather than remove it. So it's always seemed to me that we've badly misnamed panic disorder. What I think, maybe when we do DSM 6 or 7, we could get around to changing this. What I think panic disorder should really be called is the disorder of excessive self-protection, because that's really how it functions. Disorder of excessive self-protection. Here's something I hear from so many clients, despairingly: despite my best efforts, my panic keeps getting worse. Despite my best efforts, it gets worse. And that's heartfelt and sincere, but there's something mistaken about that. I'm going to help the client come to see this. It isn't despite your best efforts that the panic keeps getting worse. It's because of your best efforts that the panic gets worse, because your best efforts are aimed at fight and flight and running away and stiffening up and clearing my mind and staying out of that crowded room and staying on the right-hand lane and so on. It's not despite their best efforts, it's because of their best efforts, and the work has to help a client notice this and begin to redirect the energy behind those best efforts into something more productive. So that's the realization of the misperception that Freud talked about. So we're aiming to help a client come to see and recognize, find evidence in their own lives of how they've been tricked into treating this discomfort as a danger, and find ways to correct that. So I'm always looking, I'm always listening as I'm talking with the client for some sign of a humorous response that they're having. A smile, some kind of indication that they realize, well, I know this doesn't make sense. I know it sounds peculiar. It's ironic, isn't it? Those kinds of things, because I want to follow up with those and help a client be able to see and enjoy the humor of that paradoxical condition. If they don't offer one, I'm probably going to inquire more actively and look for one. Here's a client I saw just a couple of weeks ago, a woman with panic attacks and rather severe health anxiety, who's continually offended and angry at herself because she has what she regards as irrational fears. And gets very angry. I'm a logical, intelligent, rational person. I shouldn't be having these thoughts. And now she's engaged in a fight, in a denunciation of her own thoughts and by extension herself. This is not a help-seeking position. This is not a position from which a person's going to feel better. Any other illogic in your life, I ask? And she says, no, it's just this one goddamn stupid thing. What is wrong with me? Oh, okay. And I happened to ask her, well, do you have any superstitions? And oh boy, does it turn out she has some superstitions. And somehow she's got the mother of all superstitions and regards herself as a thoroughly logical and rational person who's offended by this. And one of the superstitions it turns out she has, after I asked her about it and we talked about the relevance of it, when she sees an airplane fly overhead, she blows them a kiss. She did this once, years ago, and thereafter found herself unable to watch an airplane go by without blowing them a kiss, because what might happen if she didn't blow them a kiss? Well, probably nothing's going to happen, but what if it does? The hell with it. And now she can't, some days several planes go by, she gets kind of busy. I've never told this to anybody before. This is so embarrassing. And there's a hint. If I'm embarrassed by a problem, what does that tell me about the problem? If I feel embarrassment about a problem, I'm going to ask the client, what does that tell me about the problem? Well, there's something funny about this problem, isn't it? What's the embarrassing part? Ultimately, that there's something about this that's kind of nonsensical, that doesn't stand up under the light of day. So now we're having an extended conversation about this thoroughly rational person who's so offended. Well, you're kind of embarrassed about this, all right. I just wonder, have you ever been in a car with somebody or walking down the street with somebody and an airplane flies overhead? Aren't you embarrassed to do this? Don't they ask you why you're doing this? And she said, well, yeah, if I'm with somebody, I don't blow it. I just make a little quiet smack with my lips. She's found a workaround. Okay, I can't do this. I'll just do this. Hope for the best. So, all right, I'm going to ask a lot of dumb questions here. This is how we get to it. Are you sure that's adequate? I can just imagine. I can imagine the pilot up there. I don't know. Did you hear it? I thought I heard something. I'm not sure. Should we turn around and go back and check? Because she's going to, okay, maybe this will work. And how loud does it have to be? So we're getting to the point where she can start to realize, well, you know what? I guess I'm not entirely as logical and rational all the time as I had thought. And so maybe this other one is just of a piece. Maybe I don't have to get so offended because, after all, a lot of people are superstitious. And at this point, this woman's not only laughing, she's crying with tears. That's the kind of crying I like to see in my office. When people are laughing so hard, it brings tear to their face. And I can tell you, she's not going to see an airplane in the sky again and have the same reaction that she did before, because now she's going to remember the conversation. And I suggested she might try a few other things, maybe just wave and shout, "Good luck, suckers!" Something, anything, just to play with it so she can start to see, gosh almighty, it's not the worst thing in the world to have an illogical thought or even do something illogical or irrational. And maybe I don't have to get so offended by my other fears either. So that's part of the way that I want to get into it. A client will give me a little hint a smile, a look, a mention of it's ironic, it's peculiar, it's whatever, and I'm going to dig in and ask all kinds of little questions until we find something that helps that client dig out the funny part a little better. I have a video clip I want to show you. This is not a client session. It's a podcast interview. An interview with a Canadian podcaster. But in every other respect, it's like a minute and a half or so of talking with the client about what happens during their panic attack. And I think he even says at the beginning, well, now I'm gonna get some free therapy out of you. And we'll spend about a minute and a half discussing his panic attack. So without further ado, let me just play it for you. Oh. Assuming that the volume works, and it doesn't look like it is. Is our tech guy anywhere here? No? Yes, would you please? Because I'm just dying for you to see this. Huh? Yes. Yeah, I can see that it's on. All right, well. I'll hold that in abeyance, but hopefully we'll get to play it. Okay. Another way that a lot of this comes out is when we talk about breathing. And boy, I know there's, in the last few years, there's been controversy and different viewpoints about how to approach breathing and treatment. I've always done a lot of work with breathing with my panic attack clients because most of them come in and faulty breathing is the engine for a lot of their symptoms. It makes them feel lightheaded, it makes them feel dizzy, it makes their chest hurt. So I continue to find it of value to help them find a different way to breathe, not as a way to prevent or control the panic attack, but as a device that will help you stay in place and go through the exposure and allow yourself to feel and observe everything that happens during the panic attack. So let me pause here and see if something's happening. Yeah. Are you here to save our sound? Excellent, thank you. Now would be great, yeah. I just have the one. Got it. What is this doing? If I need to, I also have it as a separate file on the computer. Okay.
Let's, you know what, I'm going to get some free therapy here. Let's analyze my first panic attack because I think it will be a good example for folks.
All right, that's why it's doing it.
I was on the air.
Everything
And-
else will be okay after this, yeah?
Should be, yes, sir.
Let's, you know what, I'm going to get some free therapy here. Let's analyze my first panic attack because I think it will be a good example for folks because it came out of the blue, as you had mentioned. So I was on TV I was on the air, and I didn't have an urge to pee. I was worried I was going to pee. As silly as that sounds. And then I launched into full panic attack mode at that point. So explain to me what was happening there.
Well, it sounds like as an anxiety symptom, you had this intrusive thought.
And that's all it was. It was just a thought.
Right, right, and that's all you need. You had the intrusive thought, oh my God, I'm going to pee right here while I'm on the camera, and I have to do something about that. I'm going to take that thought, not as an uncomfortable thought, not as, well, that's kind of goofy, what an unpleasant distraction while I'm doing my program here. I'm going to take that thought as a threat, and now I have to oppose that thought. I have to protect myself against that thought. I try to get it off my mind. I try to stop thinking about it. Maybe I try and figure out how can I signal them to cut the cameras? What should I do? All you have is a thought, but you're probably responding to that thought as if it's a threat. And you got to do something about it rather than just humor the thought and go on about your business.
So then my body and my thoughts were not talking to each other properly.
Yeah, your thoughts were not describing accurately what was going on in your body. You were nervous, and you got the signal that this means you're going to pee uncontrollably, that you're going to lose control of your bladder. And there's always an issue there. Many of the thoughts are always about you're going to lose control of your voice, of your heart, whatever. You're going to lose control, and that's going to be disaster.
Okay. What did I do wrong? And I shouldn't say wrong, but what could I have done at that point? And it's tough to answer, really, I think, because I'd never experienced, I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So when you get these thoughts, especially if you've had panic attacks before, how do you unthink something? How do you tell yourself, wait a minute, it's okay?
Yeah. Well, and you said two very different things there. Unthink something or tell yourself it's okay. You can't unthink something. Once you got a thought, you can't go back and erase it. The only thing you can do is get into an argument with it. Oh, come on, I'm not going to pee. Yes, you are. No, but what if you do? And so what's happening now? Now I'm just talking about pee to myself. So there, you can try and unthink it, but that just means you're arguing with your thoughts, and that's going to make a person more anxious.
Okay.
What's the opposite of unthinking?
Unthink, accept?
Yes, yeah. All right, I'm having that thought again about peeing. I wonder if I could hit the first row from here. I'm going to play with that thought because I don't get to pick and choose
You're
what
lightening
thoughts
it up.
I have.
You're lightening it up.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a disaster.
No, this is a discomfort.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's the trick right there. If I treat that thought as a sign of disaster, well, I'm going to get in for more difficulty and fear now. And if I can treat it as the discomfort it is, then I can probably lighten it up and move back to what I want to be doing at the moment.
Okay, I hope that was audible for most of you. Two things in particular stand out for me in that, the part where he said, it was a silly thought. Yeah, and that's where I want to stop and intervene and find out about, well, what was the silly part and how did you feel about having a silly thought? Because it's all on the line there. If I have a silly thought and can treat it like silliness, great, I'm halfway home. And if I have a silly thought and treat it like a threat, now I'm digging myself into a big hole. So that's the perfect moment there. That was one of those indications that I'm looking for from a client that they're within range of being able to find this funny. And the other thing I want to call your attention to in here, the question I asked later on, what did I ask it about? Unthinking. What would be the opposite of unthinking? I must ask that question 8 times a day. What would be the opposite of this or that? Take a client's instinctive reply to a panic attack. What would be the opposite of that? And that's going to bring them into therapeutic territory. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about, rule of opposites, but this is basically going to the realization that panic is a counterintuitive problem. And if you respond to a counterintuitive problem with an intuitive response, that's how you make it worse. That we're always looking for the opposites here. We're always looking for something counterintuitive. If you, we don't have counterintuitive problems in our lives all the time. But if you go and get a new puppy and bring it home and the puppy gets off the leash, runs down the street, how are you going to get that puppy back? If you run after that puppy, well, now we're running after a dog that's got twice as many legs as I do. That's not going to work out so good. What would be the opposite of chasing after that puppy? Well, if I run away, now we're playing chase the owner, and that's going to work out pretty well. And across the board, panic presents all kinds of counterintuitive challenges to the client that are best resolved by a counterintuitive reply. And I summarize that as opposites. What would be the opposite of that? And anything about this before I move on? I think those are the two key points. But you can see what I'm looking for there, a way to help them treat these thoughts as less than sacrosanct, less than powerfully predictive. And how do I know they're not predictive? We've already looked at their history and found out, yeah, I bet 0 on this. I don't think I asked them in this segment, how many times have you peed when you had this thought? But if I had, the answer would have been 0. I'm batting 0. Now let's see if I can get back to the slides. All right, excellent. Okay, that'll work. So let me ask you this. Can you hear me okay when I walk away from the mic? You've all seen plenty of people with panic attacks, I imagine. If you ask a client, show me what you do to get your breath back when you can't catch your breath, when you're not getting enough air, what do they show you? Chest. Yeah, let me see it. Show me. Okay, all right, great. Somebody want to do this with me? Could I ask for a volunteer? I'm going to point to somebody and ask for a volunteer, which isn't exactly voluntary. Is there anybody in this general area that might be willing to role play? Oh, great, thank you. Thank you for volunteering. Yes, please give a hand to our volunteer. Yeah, come on up here. We got another microphone. Hello? Yes? Hello? No? Okay. Well, you can use that. I'll just shout.
Okay.
So I'm talking to a client. Thank you for doing this. I'm talking to a client who's told me I had this terrible experience. I couldn't catch my breath. I was at a meeting. I was, waiting in line at the airport, at a restaurant. Couldn't catch my breath. So we're just going to play that out for a minute or two. We'll go ahead. I'm going to feed you that line. Tell me how you couldn't catch your breath.
So I was at a meeting and I couldn't catch my breath, and I started to feel really lightheaded, and my palms started to feel really sweaty, and I was having a hard time hearing.
Hearing, yeah. Well, that must have been scary. What did you do?
I kept trying to catch my breath, trying to make sure I could hear.
All right, you kept trying to catch your breath. Show me what you did. Okay, all right. So I see you doing this.
Yeah, because I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Yes, yeah, you were doing that to get your breath back. There's a surprising rule of thumb about panic, and I'll just mention it for now. We'll get back to it again. A person's gut instinct of what to do when they're having a panic attack is almost always dead wrong. Almost always 180 degrees dead wrong. So much so that if you do the opposite of your gut instinct, you're going to be a lot better off than following your gut instinct.
So I should hold my breath?
Well, that would be 90 degrees different.
Oh, okay.
We're looking for 180. And here's a little, and this is always a confusional segment for the client, and I let it be that way because they're searching. What the hell is he getting at here? and I want them to have that search. So, what would be the opposite of that breath you just showed me?
Holding my breath or breathing out?
Ah, yeah, now we've gone from 90 to 180. Yes, yes, yeah. And oftentimes we'll take a few minutes, the client just won't know what I'm getting at. And then I might say, well, let's say you had a video clip of me doing that allegedly deep breath that you showed me. You had a video clip of me doing, and you played it backwards. You ran the video backwards. What would you see me do then? And then people that have been struggling and confused, that helps them get off the hook. Oh, and sometimes they just mime it. They say, well, I would see you go, and then I can say, what would we call that? But one way or the other, I'm going to get the client to say an exhale, because that's what they need at that point. An exhale, not an inhale. And I'm going to relabel it right away a sigh, because I don't want them investing a lot of effort in the exhale. It's just a sigh, I might say, the kind of sigh you might make if somebody told you something really annoying or forced you into volunteering. Thank God, that's the kind of sigh we're looking for here, exactly the opposite of that. And then I'm going to go on and show the client a breathing exercise, and very briefly, I'm going to sigh, and I'm going to hold my hands here because I want to see what muscles am I using. And what I want to see is that these muscles aren't doing anything. These muscles are doing all the work. Whereas before, I think you could probably see these muscles were doing all the work. Going in the opposite direction. I'm going to sigh. I'm going to relax my upper body. And then I'm going to inhale through my nose by pushing my belly out. And when I get as much air as I can that way, that's it. That's the end of the inhale. And then I'm going to pause and exhale again. And now I'm breathing out and in, not up and down. Up and down is bad. Out and in is good. That's such a powerful redirection when people can take it and go to the opposite with the breathing. And they'll practice it and see, yeah, in fact, it works. And now not only have we done a nice breathing intervention, but I've set the stage for rule of opposites throughout the treatment. Because again and again, we're going to come back to that question that I want the client to internalize. What would be the opposite of that? That thing I just did, or that thing that my brain is screaming at me to do? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andre. Give Andre a hand. Appreciate your doing that. So that's a very brief intro to both rule of opposites and the breathing. And it's going to give the client a way out of something, a blind alley that they've walked into and can't find a way out. The harder I try to inhale, the worse it gets. It wouldn't occur to them in a million years we'll do the opposite, but now we're setting that up as a framework. And people, clients will find that funny. Over time, people will start talking back to me and saying things like, oh, let me guess, the opposite, right? Yeah. All of that stuff, and they take some humor in that, because it is kind of funny that I have to keep turning my logic on its head, and yet it's unmistakable from the client's experience that it works that way. Did an airplane just go overhead? All right, so rule of opposites. This is a way of formalizing paradox into the treatment. And helping people do self-help that's based on paradox. Anybody doing any paradoxical work? Okay. This was big when I was first coming up, and it's largely faded into the background. But paradox is a very powerful form of approaching panic. Classic form of paradox is prescribing the problem. Well, I see we have about 4 minutes left today, client. Would you go ahead and have a panic attack now so I can observe it and ask you some questions? Well, guess what? We might have somebody that was just hanging on to the edge of their seat, hoping to get through the session without a panic attack, and now it's a lot harder. Now I don't think I can. Now I don't think I can. Prescribing the symptom. So my gut instinct of what to do is the opposite, and so I should do the opposite of my gut instinct. This takes some courage on the part of the client in the beginning, but if they had the experience with the breathing, well, then they have some experience that encourages them. Yeah, there's something to do. There's something to this, and this is a way of helping them break through the trick and realizing that this is counterintuitive, and I'm going to do the opposite. You know, broadly, you can see, yeah, the opposite of flee is stay in place or run towards it. The opposite of tense up is just hang out and relax. The opposite of trying to bring it to an end is, oh, let's make this last a little longer. I had my first instinctive experience with this many years ago. I had a young man in my office who was feeling terribly panicky about his stomach. And his stomach was getting nervous and very uncomfortable, and he was getting agitated. It's getting worse as I sit here, getting worse as I sit here. And he wanted to leave, and I was probably 2 years into my practice. I didn't really know what to do. But I remembered some little Milton Erickson readings I had done, so I asked him, well, on a 1 to 10 scale, how bad is your stomach right now? And he said, probably like a 7. And I asked him, well, can you get it to an 8? Can you get it to an 8? Crossing my fingers for luck. And he sits there for a second, and he made a good faith college try, and then he says to me, a little abashed, I think it's more like a 6 now. Oh, well, try harder. Try harder. And we went ahead and, invented that right there. When people try and make their symptoms work, they're generally worse. They will generally fail. And as you get some experience with that and begin to deploy it, it's a powerful, powerful intervention. And then people can start to do it themselves. That's the rule of opposites. My gut instinct is dead wrong when I'm panicking. I should do the opposite of that. In terms of worry and anticipation, equally powerful just for thoughts as it is for behaviors. See how much time I got here. Okay. Years ago, my wife and I moved 1,000 miles from Chicago to New York and bought a bed and breakfast and opened up a bed and breakfast. We were innkeepers. And the very first morning, we were sitting down in the parlor with our 6-year-old son, and guests are coming down the staircase waiting to see, well, I wonder what the Carbonells have fixed for breakfast today. And we're sitting there, and you could cut the tension with a knife. We suddenly realized, oh my God, what have we done? What have we done? We're not innkeepers. We don't know what the hell we're doing here. And they're coming in, and my son, 6-year-old son, sitting between us, he turns to both of us, and he says, act natural. Act natural. That was a paradoxical instruction. I think it's too late, son. Too late for that. So I want to help the client with all kinds of experiments and introductory ideas so that they can develop their own ability to use paradox and use the rule of opposites. So here's a couple of things that I frequently do. I have, or at least did before the pandemic, a couple of times a year, have a workshop for fearful flyers, and then we go on a flight together. And this is often people haven't been on an airplane for 10 or 20 years. Some of them, not always, their fears, vary considerably what each one of them is afraid of. But there's always a few people that are afraid, I'm going to get so anxious, I'm going to charge the cockpit. I'm going to lose control of myself and kick out a window or try and force the door, and I'll be that guy on the 6 o'clock news getting duct taped to a chair and being held down, and oh my God, terrible, terrible. And on this basis, they're afraid to fly. So sometime during the flight, I'm going to ask, at least one of them, somebody that has this fear, listen, would you be willing to do an experiment? And that's how I always ask this stuff. Would you be willing to do an experiment? Would you be willing to do an experiment? And people always say yes to experiments. This is one experiment I've come to realize. I'm pretty sure nobody's ever actually going to do this one, but usually people comply. But the experiment I'm going to ask for is what I'd like for you to do, client who's afraid of losing control of yourself, push the call button for the flight attendant and ask for a packet of sugar or a little thing of cream. Well, Dave, I'm not drinking any coffee. Well, that's all right. You're still entitled to a packet of sugar if you want. What's the harm? Push the call button, ask for the packet of sugar. See, I don't want to ask for a packet of sugar, Dave. Oh, come on. You came, 15 years of not flying, and this is, push the call button, ask for a packet. I'm not going to do that. And I will wait until it's quite clear, nope, this client has no way, shape, or form going to do this experiment, and then I can redirect them this way. Well, if you're so unwilling to push the call button and ask for a packet of sugar that you don't need, how much less likely are you to run up there and kick in the damn door of the cockpit, for God's sakes? And they see the point. They see the point that people have this terrible fear of losing out of control. They're generally the most mild-mannered people on earth with no history of acting out of control. And control is about not what you think, not what you feel, but what you do. And so I want to help them get to the point of realizing that, yeah, it's what I do. And even when Dave asked me for another one of his experiments, no, the sugar, that's going too far. I'm not willing to act that crazy. So if you're not willing to act that crazy, I don't foresee any windows being kicked out. People in a similar vein have lots of different kinds of feared outcomes with fear of driving. Many people are afraid of a collision. Some people have more of a social kind of anxiety. What if I cut people off? What if I do something rude in traffic? What if I inconvenience people? What if I just look like a mean, uncaring person? And they're very anxious about driving in that respect. So what do you suppose would be a good task experiment for somebody like that? Be rude, yes, yeah. So we're going to do a lot of things like this. Client, you see that nun standing over there in the corner? Honk at that nun. Honk at that nun. I'm not going to honk at the nun. And if they do, they'll have a realization, and if they don't, they realize, gee, I'm not such a good candidate for being rude. And they generally find this hilarious that a psychologist is asking you, would you honk at that guy walking across the street with the crutches, please? Honk at that person. So I'm always going to offer them these paradoxical requests. And from that, they can make a better judgment for themselves. What's my predilection to acting rude and out of control? So, and on the business of control, you got to look at their issues about control in terms of the context in which they experience them. People who are afraid of flying tend to be people who don't have the control that they want. They would that's why they watch the Weather Channel. They would like to be in charge of the go, no-go decision. That's why they're scanning for terrorists in the gate. They would like to be the security people. What they really hate most about flying is that they have no control over anything, and they want it. And so the fear of flying is about this mismatch of, I want to control stuff, and I can't do it. And that person has to learn better how to acclimate to lack of control. If you look at fear of public speaking, you're going to see the very opposite end of things. Here's somebody who's been delegated a lot of control. Come in and talk to our group. We'll listen. You talk. You tell us when there's a break. You tell us when we can ask questions. No, I don't want to do any of that. I'd rather phone it in. Hello to you there. I'm not going to look at you or even talk to you because I don't want you to ask me any questions. They want to get rid of all the controls that have been delegated to them. People with panic hear a lot about it's a control issue, and they feel a little ashamed about this, like they're some kind of controlling person. They need some help in seeing, actually, it's a mismatch between what they can control and what they want to control. And a fearful flyer who can acclimate to, well, I'm just a passenger. I sit here and you tell me when to get on and when to get off. That's going to be a much more comfortable flyer. And a speaker, public speaker who can get acclimated to, I will run the meeting and tell you when it's done and so on. That's a person who's going to become a lot more comfortable than the person who tries to stand back and not use any of those powers. Question over here?
It seems like a little bit different process to be targeted if that fear of not having control is from some external source, like a plane will crash or a terrorist, versus I've been in charge of time. It seems like how would you address the same principles using the efficiency paradox, or would it be different?
Is it different when they're worried about some external threat rather than some internal threat? I strive to make it as much the same as possible. So when they're concerned about weather or terrorists, well, I'm going to ask them, oh, okay, you're watching the Weather Channel. I appreciate that. You're trying to be a good citizen. Do you happen to know when the meeting will take place, where the decision is made, is the flight going to take off or not? I want to help them come to see that you might be getting information about something that's possible out there, but you have no application for it. Nobody is waiting to find out, did the guy in 7A say we can take off? Okay, and there it is. There's the funny bit. I'm all dressed up, and nobody's waiting to see my outfit. Similarly with terrorists, well, I appreciate, you're scanning everybody in the gate. Before we board, after we board. Let me just ask you something. Do you share this information with the crew? Do you ever push the flight button? Yeah, I think the guy in 19A, I'm not sure about his shoes. Oh, no, and people, that's exactly what people, oh, no, that would be embarrassing. Huh, that would be embarrassing. Well, what does that mean? If I'm, when I experience embarrassment, what is that telling me? So I think I can help them get to the same point. Yeah, and they keep these efforts a secret. So if you're keeping this effort a secret, well, what good is that going to do? I have a secret plan here I'm not going to share with anybody. It would have kept us aloft. It's a shame. But I'm not going to tell you about it. Yeah. So I'm just going to keep on digging and look, because I know where I'm heading. I want to find that response where they smile and they laugh at this is a foible. This isn't a cancer or a disease. This is a foible. Yeah, isn't that funny? I have these peculiarities. So that's where we're going to go with that. Okay. Cognitive diffusion. Boy, I wish we had had cognitive diffusion when I was studying. I find it so much more influential. Oh, sorry, question way in the back.
The question about the terrorists, I get the sense that in that situation, the person that has that anxiety probably isn't someone who does a lot of profiling in problematic ways, like racial stereotyping. I work with first responders, and so that sometimes can be a problem there. So how would you deal with that if there would be concerns about stereotypes coming in, and then the person would actually act on the stereotypes?
Okay, so a first responder who's scanning the passengers and maybe does know what to look for. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would come to them with the same question. Do you share this with the crew? If you're trained in this regard, if you're a first responder and you have skills, and you spot somebody that looks suspicious, well, they tell you right at the airport. They keep broadcasting it every day. If you see something, say something. Are you going to do something with that? So somebody that does have training, somebody that does have skills, I would hope their answer to that would be, well, yes, I am going to mention it to the flight crew. And that would be a reasonable thing to do. if they scan for terrorists, think they identify one, and then just sit there and try and contain themselves the whole flight, that's not going to help anybody in the flight, nor is it going to make them comfortable.
I guess I was thinking about the opposite end of the problem is if someone, maybe the first responders think like they're using a general heuristic like Middle Easterners are more likely to be terrorists, and they are acting on that.
And they are what?
They are acting on it. They are, informing something.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we're trying to help them think about the paradox going in the other direction.
Yeah. Okay, so if somebody, a first responder, somebody that has some skills is applying them in an overly racially oriented way, well, I don't know. I don't encounter that much. I think I would probably still rest on, well, share what you think with the crew and let them apply what they know, okay? Because they're flight people, you're a fire department, or they're flight people, you're some kind of terrestrial first responder typically. So, all right, if you feel you have something to contribute, give it to them and let them do with it what they see fit. That's probably as much as I would get into it. But as I say, I don't think it's even ever come that far with that. I quite haven't run across that problem yet. So I want to help people basically change the way they relate to the thoughts, change the relationship they have with their anxious and panic-inducing thoughts, rather than striving to change the content of the thoughts. As we saw with the man who was on the broadcast and was having the thought about peeing, he's probably not a good candidate for cognitive restructuring right there while the cameras are grinding. It's just too hard, too much like arguing with yourself. I want him to go in the opposite direction and make friends with the thought, play with the thought, and that's largely where I see the province of cognitive diffusion. So, bunch of different applications for cognitive diffusion. I'm going to ask people if they have any bilingual capacities. And in this regard, a year of high school Spanish would be great. Because what I'd like to suggest to you to do, client, is do your worrying in your weakest language. How do you say choke to death in German? Hold on a minute. Maybe you need to get a bilingual dictionary. That would be okay. But see what it's like doing your worrying in your weaker language where you have to stop and think about the words. The content presumably is the same, but the way in which they're approaching the thought, the way in which they're trying to literally translate the thought makes all the difference in the world. Now they're aware of stumbling with their German rather than aware of, I'm about to have a heart attack and die. Ernst, in his single phobia work, likes to have people, when he's working with snake phobics, likes to have people name the snake. Well, what's this about? Well, it's just kind of a funny little thing. Here comes Irving, the 3-foot orange snake. It makes a difference. They're relating to that notion of the snake differently when they've given it a name. I'm going to ask people to, we do a lot of work with worry appointments. I ask people to set aside 2 10-minute appointments each day. Do your worrying during that time. Fill the 10 minutes with lots of what-if worry. What if this and what if that? What if these other things? Do it out loud. Do it in front of a mirror. So you can see yourself and hear yourself worrying as well. You're taking it in on all kinds of sensory channels. I don't overtly tell people this, but I also expect at some point hearing themselves worry and rattling into the mirror is going to start to strike them as funny. And that's a beautiful response. The content is all the same, but now they're responding to it with a little wry sense of humor or maybe a laugh. I'm going to encourage people to convert their worry into poems and songs. Haiku is nice for this because now a person has to stop and think, well, how can I get this into 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Suddenly it's a whole extra piece of work to be repeating this worry when I have to convert it into the appropriate number of syllables. And just repeating the poem to themselves starts to be a very different thing and a really funny thing. I worked with a woman who had some terrible fears about how her diet was going to affect her mental health. And she felt if she ate meat, I think she would lose her mind, and if she ate solely vegetarian, she would lose her memory. So you could see what a quandary she was in. I can't win for losing here. Here's her haiku. I eat animals. I'll probably go insane. Please water my plants. That's kind of nice, isn't it? She didn't have this thought then again, well, the choice between meat and my mind without remembering her haiku. It just never had quite the same effect on her. So was this a cure? No, but she never had quite the same intensity of a fear reaction to thinking about what to eat, just by virtue of spending some time on that haiku. If haiku's not your thing, limerick is just as good. And some people like limerick better because it seems to have more energy to it. Any other thing you can do to encourage the client to tack something onto their worry that doesn't involve contradicting the worry or changing it is going to be all to the good. So can you do your worries in a bad French accent? This is also fine. You know, and probably most people, I'd defy them to do a bad French accent while talking about how they're going to die and go crazy and not find something funny about that. So that's a nice way to go. What we're looking for is a different outcome, a surprising outcome. Much more so than anxiety reduction, we're looking for the client to have some kind of a surprising reaction to the exposure of spending time with the animal, or the exposure of going on the airplane or on the highway, or even the exposure of spending time with anxiety-producing thoughts. So we're looking for that surprise here. You know, that's what Michelle Krask was talking about with respect to this. And most often, that surprise is going to be most powerful if it's a pleasant surprise, a good belly laugh. Years ago, I worked with a woman, had this terrible fear of using public bathrooms in malls. And I was with her at the mall one day when she decided, okay, today's the day, and she walked down to the end of the corridor, and she went into the bathroom, and I stood outside for a few minutes wondering, well, I wonder how this is going to turn out. And she came out a couple of minutes later, and she stood in the middle of the hallway, and she shouted out for everybody to hear, I did it! She was so excited and so pleased that she could hardly believe that it didn't occur to her. People might even wonder, what's she talking about? She was just so taken with that and so thrilled. That's the kind of, you know, surprising response that we're looking for. An experiment I'll frequently do in session, and I found ways to adapt. You know, I do this on Zoom as well as in person. Is this? Want to do an experiment, client? Yes, because people always say yes to experiments. Let's see if we can get your most feared, worrisome thought here into like 20 words or less. And the first 2 words are going to be what if, so they really only have about 18 to work with. But let's get a really powerful version of your scary, unpleasant thought. And we'll massage it, and I'll chime in with some ideas to help make the idea, you know, more loathsome. And then, well, here's the experiment. I'm going to ask you, client, to go ahead and repeat this out loud 25 times. And I'm just going to keep count for you. You don't have to keep count. You know, what if I'm going to repeat this for 25 times? And this is tough. This is really tough for a lot of people. You know, sometimes people cry. Sometimes people get really, really afraid on thinking this thought, on hearing them say this thought. But they generally persist, and then they're going to do you know, probably all 25. And then we can have this conversation. The emotional impact of that last repetition, how did it compare to the emotional impact of the first repetition? And here's where you're going to hear people say varieties of, well, there was no comparison. That last one, it started to just be a sound. I could feel my tongue thickening as I just kept repeating these same words. The first one, you know, scared the bejesus out of me. And that's also another surprise. So anything we can do to help people step into it and be surprised by the outcome, and preferably a funny surprise, that's the gold standard. That really is. So that's how we help people give the lie to the idea that thoughts can be dangerous. Worked with a woman who had a terrible fear of having to stop at a red light. And on the basis of this, she hadn't driven hardly anywhere for years. And when she did drive, she would stay in the right-hand lane and keep an eye on the traffic lights ahead. And when she saw one that was going to be red, by the time she got there, she'd pull over and wait until she could see it was going to be green when I get up there. So even the time she drove, she hadn't been to a red light. And her fear was, what if I get stopped at a red light and the light changes and I don't notice right away, or I'm just a little slow pulling off, or for whatever reason, and the people behind me start honking. Honk, honk, honk. Honking drives me crazy, and I get rattled. And what if I step on the wrong pedal and run over somebody? What if I, God forbid, stall the car, and then I'm stuck there and everybody's honking? And you know, what if I run out of the car and run across the street and get run down by somebody else, and I've left my babies my orphaned babies are in the car, and I'm roadkill in Michigan Avenue. So okay. Want to do an experiment? Yeah. And the experiment was to sit at a red light and wait, and when it goes green, to start a little stopwatch, and let's find out how long it takes before people start honking at you. Okay, I just asked her to do the opposite. I dressed it up as an experiment. Oh, okay, it's an experiment, I'll do it. And so she has her clipboard and she has her timer. Sometimes she would sit there, the light would turn green, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, nothing, amber, goes back to green. In Chicago, people just sitting there, not honking at you. Fortunately, sometimes they would honk and then she'd give them a little wave, oh, sorry, and drive off. And she would laugh and her kids would say, oh, Mommy, not another experiment, come on. Completely defanged this terrible thing that as long as she was trying to hold it at bay, she felt terrified. Once she stepped into it, she started to find the funny parts to it. So it's good to have some metaphors in your therapeutic inventory. Probably the one I've used the most over the years is Uncle Argument. Well, you're going to a big family event. Maybe it's a bar mitzvah, maybe it's a wedding, maybe it's a graduation party, whatever. Hey, you were the last one to RSVP, and so you got seated next to Uncle Argument. And he's a decent enough guy, but the man just loves to argue. If you're a Democrat, he's a Republican. If you're baseball, he's soccer, and so on. And arguing gives you a stomach ache. How could you go to the party and not have to argue with Uncle Argument? And I'll play this out with clients, and they'll get into it on a serious enough note. Well, you could change seats. No, nobody's going to trade seats to sit next to this guy. Everybody hates sitting next to him. We're eventually going to get to the point that, well, you can just agree with him. You can humor the heck out of him. Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears, absolutely so true. Again, playing with that and exaggerating it. That's a nice metaphor for how to approach these kinds of worrisome thoughts. I had a little thing happen at the height of the pandemic. My son and I were, and I mention this to clients a lot, my son and I were standing in a parking lot. I was giving him some groceries, and a guy comes down the alley and he says to us, have you got a ladder? Well, no, actually, we don't have a ladder. Well, come to think of it, I got a ladder, but there's at home, that's a mile from here. And the man says, oh, well, I need a 40-foot ladder, or 50-foot ladder maybe, I think he said, 50-foot ladder. Oh, well, certainly don't have that. You see, I live on that building over there. I live on the 5th floor, and I locked myself out. The window's open. If I could get a 50-foot ladder, I could climb in. Well, sorry, we don't have a ladder for you. And my son is trying to find ways to be helpful. Well, I could drive you to a locksmith. We could do this or that. You want to use my cell phone? Call the landlord. It wasn't, and we were racking our brains to find some way to help this man. It wasn't until he said, well, I could probably get to a locksmith, but I locked my wallet in the apartment. If you could lend me $50 till tomorrow, I could get to the locksmith and I'll pay you here tomorrow. And all of a sudden we realized, oh, it's this. People get to the same moment with their what if worry. They're taking it seriously and getting upset. And when they hear the what if again, oh, it's this. And that's a metaphor for, oh, I see what this is about. I thought we were trying to help you get into your apartment. Actually, we're just the intended victims of a scam. And that's so similar to what people go through when they're besieged by all their what if something bad thoughts. So that's a metaphor that I like to offer people. What else we got on here? All right. What time do we end today? 12:30? 12:40? Oh, we got plenty of time. To have those kinds of metaphors that they can relate to their own internal experience, because they are in a conversation with themselves. And depending on how they handle that conversation, depending on how literally they take the content of their fears, that's going to have a lot to do with whether or not they end up going to the panic party or not. I still find myself talking about float a lot of times. Thank you, Claire Weeks from the 60s, really. And most clients have heard about this, and sometimes they come in and grouse. Float, I don't know how to make myself float. I'm just no good at floating. No good at floating. And they're mad at themselves. People so often get mad at themselves. And if I can, help them find something humorous that they can jolly themselves out of it, that's all to the good. When people get mad about floating, I usually want to say something like, you can't float, really? Well, a block of wood can float. A block of wood can float. And just leave that out there wondering, what the hell is he talking about? Block of wood, but you know what, a block of wood is probably a better floater than you are, because a block of wood isn't going to have the idea, I got to swim. You're out there floating, you probably think you got to do something with your arms and legs. You got to do something. That's what's getting in the way if you're floating. A block of wood can float a lot better than you, because it doesn't have any thoughts saying, do this, do that, stop, prevent this, don't do that. The closer you can come to impersonating a block of wood, the better you're going to be at floating. And I think initially people aren't sure if they should be offended by this or not, but we play with it long enough that they find, oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah, block of wood. I can pretend to be a block of wood. So we want to help them get away from the fighting metaphors. If I never hear about the panic demon again, it'll be too soon. Any kind of metaphor about the panic demon, the panic enemy, the panic this or that is going to take people in the wrong direction. What do we got for enemies? We got fight them off or run away from them. That's the opposite of what we want to do with panic. So we're not looking to have any of those kinds of metaphors that encourage people into fighting. Here's some other examples of unusual wordings, unusual suggestions, unusual questions that kind of set people back a little bit, and they think about it, and they find a different perspective by which to respond to some of their thoughts. To what do you attribute your failure to experience the feared outcome? Boy, that's one I've used so many times. A person who's afraid of dying, to what do you attribute your failure to experience that death? And because of the double negative, they have to stop and think about it, and they get into a whole different mindset. To what do I attribute? Oh, you mean, how do I explain the fact that I haven't died? Yeah, okay. That's a different question. They haven't even stopped to think about that question. They've been so busy trying to protect themselves and not die. Well, how come you haven't had that happen yet? Gee, I don't know. That's a good question. When I'm working with somebody who's really preoccupied with death, I like to ask them this question. Do you happen to know, client, what the cumulative mortality rate is in this state? And I like to blurt that out and say it kind of fast so they don't have much of a chance to process it. Do you know what the cumulative mortality rate is in the city of Denver? And then I'll say, well, it's shockingly high. It's 100%. It's 100%. It hasn't changed since the colonial era, for God's sakes. So I always want to, even those kinds of conventional questions, I want to apply a little bit of a hook that's going to make the actual answer kind of humorous to them. What do you think your job is when you're having a panic attack? What's your job? And well, what do people think is their job when they're having a panic attack? What would you say? To stop it, yeah, to make it end. To make it end, I got to stop it. When's it going to end? How's it going to end? What can I do to make it end? Well, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a panic attack that didn't end? And this is kind of a world-class dumb guy question. Because, well, duh, Dave, if they're sitting here not having a panic attack, apparently they never did have one that didn't end. But now we can take this dumb question and consider, well, what is that telling me? What does that mean? And what does this have to say about my thought that I have to find some way to make it end? I don't have to make it end. They all end no matter what I do. I do everything the best way. I do everything the worst way. We'll go through their history and look at everything they've done and find that, yeah, it was all to no effect. I did everything the best way. I did everything the worst way. The panic attacks all end no matter what I do. Now I got a much more modest job. Well, let's see if I can help myself feel a little better while I'm waiting for it to end. But that business of thinking they got to bring it to an end, terrible, terrible problem for a lot of people. They don't even notice how it's driving their behavior. Yes, question.
I wonder if you could help me understand Rule 2 a little bit better with an illustration.
Oh, sure. I'll ask people about this when they talk about using distraction as a deliberate tactic. You know, I started to sing a tune. I turned on the radio. I called up my friend and talked, a little chit-chat. I didn't even say I was having a panic attack. I just wanted to get distracted in the conversation. Okay, all right, I hear what you're saying there. So let me ask you this. If I'm motivated to distract myself from a problem client, what does that tell me about the problem? That's the question I'm going to ask the client. What comes to mind? If I'm motivated to distract myself from a problem, what does that tell me about the nature of the problem? Not important. Yeah. So, client, let's suppose you're walking down the street and a large pit bull comes running down the block at you, fur back, fangs out, snarling, clearly looking to kill you and eat you. How likely are you to start singing a happy song? Not so likely, right? When do I distract myself? When the chips are not down. When the chips are down, I don't distract myself. I'm focused like a laser on that dog or on that runaway bus. So yeah, when I catch myself trying to distract, that can be my own feedback. Oh, this again, yeah. That's such a powerful reframe. Because people are trying to distract themselves all the time, and now it's going to point to something different, and they're going to find it funny. And the same thing about secrecy. What does it tell me about a problem if I'm trying to hide it? Well, I don't know. If you're Mr. Common Sense like me, if I'm having a heart attack, I want everybody to know. I want to see ambulances lined up out there. I'm not going to walk down 3 flights of stairs and get into my car and drive 5 miles to my bachelor apartment. If I think I'm having a heart attack, I want everybody to know. And if I want to keep that a secret, if I find myself trying to keep that a secret, what does that tell me about what I'm up against? It goes to the same point. I worked with a man, I keep walking away from the microphone, sorry. I worked with a man who had this terrible fear. He was more of an OCD client. Contamination would occur and he wouldn't pay attention to it, and somebody would get harmed, and that would be on his conscience forever. And he told me one time about being at a party and seeing across the room at the punch bowl, he saw what he took to be a contaminated cup. And so he worked his way over to the punch bowl area, and he stood in front of the cups so nobody could see what he was doing, and he reached back and he got the contaminated cup and he crushed it in his hand and he put it in his pocket for safe disposal later. Okay, well, that makes sense. You know, I see what you're doing. You're trying to protect people. You know, you're a good citizen. Just one thing I'm wondering here. What did you do all that stuff about hiding it and putting it in your pocket? Did you consider, for instance, simply walking over to the refreshment stand and saying, "Stand down, everybody. There's a contaminated cup here, and I'm going to remove it. And then you can make me Citizen of the Year." And he laughed, and he said, "Oh, that would have been really embarrassing. There was probably nothing wrong with that cup." Yeah, that's what the urge for secrecy can help remind you of. Why am I trying to keep this a secret? There's something funny about this. Why am I doing the silent kiss to the airplane? Because it's a goofy idea. And if I do that with my friend, they're going to say, "What, are you crazy? You think that's influence?" So I keep it to myself. And why do I keep it to myself? Because there's really just anxiety here. There isn't any danger. That's such a powerful reminder and reframe. So always looking to deconstruct those things like secrecy and distraction. Just for a real quick 2-minute little thing, can I have another volunteer come approach the bench? Somebody want to come up and do a brief role play? Yes, great. This is something I like to do when I hear clients continually saying things like, "I hope I don't have a panic attack. I hope I don't have panic at that party. I hope I don't do this or that." Thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to ask the client, would you, I'd like you to teach me to hope the way you do. How do you hope? Tell me how to hope so that I do what you do when you're hoping you don't have a panic attack.
I don't know what to say. I just try not to have one.
Okay, but all right, so it's a peculiar question, client, but think about what you do, maybe physically or emotionally or thoughts. What's different when you're hoping, not hoping, as compared to when you're just going on about your business?
I'm stealing myself up.
You're stealing yourself up. Okay, any particular part of your body that you're stealing? Yeah, you're crunching, yeah. Okay, so I hope I don't have a panic attack. What else do you do? Any kind of emotional stealing?
Yeah, I guess I just kind of focus on it.
You just focus on it. Yeah. So, thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. That's exactly what they do. So what we're seeing here and what the client is going to start to realize, hope is really worry with a good PR agent. When people are doing this hoping, they're tensing up their body. They're trying to steel themselves. There's nothing hopeful about that at all. That's an anxiety-provoking response. Disney is going to come and sue you for using that kind of hope. And yet people continually do this. I hope I don't have a panic attack, thinking that somehow it's a good thing. When they have to figure out, how can I train him to do what I do when I hope, that's when they come to realize, wow, what I do when I hope is I tense myself up. I start struggling with my thoughts. I start tensing up my body. That doesn't sound like a good thing. So that's a great little, very short intervention. Show me how to hope. Teach me to hope the way you do. And people are going to come to see, gee, this is really worry and stressing myself out. There's nothing positive or useful about this at all. I like to do a particular version of creative hopelessness with clients, with panic clients, in which we review all the things they've done. And I do this typically on a little marker board. Let's just make a good list. Let's think about all the things you've done in your efforts to not have panic attacks. So just, imagine I was writing these on the board. What are things people usually do in an attempt to not have panic attacks? Just shout some out for me. Yeah. Drink water, yes. Avoid the feelings, yes. Drink water, often also drink alcohol. That would be another one. Ingest other substances. The avoidances. Pray. Bring people with them. Bring objects with them. Bring animals with them. And as people tell me all the things they've done, well, on the one hand, there's a whole bunch of stuff they've done. And on the other hand, I know they've come to see me for help with panic, so I know in advance none of this did the job. And that's what we're going to talk about. You've tried so many things here, and none of them have given you what you wanted to stop having panic attacks. Don't you think it's odd how little you have to show for all the efforts you've made to stop having panic attacks? Don't you think it's peculiar how little you've gotten for your efforts? And that's going to take us in a different direction. And this is where the kind of confusing term creative hopelessness comes from, of the client being able to recognize, wow, these things didn't get me what I wanted because the whole task of stop having panic attacks was misconceived. The best way to have more panic attacks is to try to stop having panic attacks. And all these things that I've done, the drinking water and the avoidance and the support dog and the medications and the alcohol and the support person, I've been trying too hard to stop having panic attacks, and what a failure that's been. And so now people can kind of start to come to see, well, it's kind of a rigged game. The harder you try not to do it, the more trouble you're going to have. And that's what they're going to get out of this creative hopelessness exercise. And the creative hopelessness in ACT terms is meant to help people come to see it's not that they're hopeless at all, it's that the unworkability of all the efforts they've made before, which in this case goes to the unworkability of the goal, I want to stop having panic attacks. Because how can I even tell if I succeeded? I got to scan my mind for any sign of panic. Oops, I just found one again. So it simply doesn't work, and that's why we come in with the paradox so heavily. So that's what I got to say to you today. There's so many different ways that you can spot in your client's behavior in response to their faces and the emphasis on words in their voices when they're right on the verge of noticing something funny about what they're doing. And if you can get in there and help them, put that on the table and see that, if the client is the one that's laughing, not so much for the therapist to be laughing, the client to be laughing, that's a powerful, powerful response. And there are ways that you can look to systematically help to magnify that and help the client discover those. And that's what we're talking about with surprise reactions to exposure. So that's what I have to say to you. Thank you so much for coming out today. Appreciate it. I'll stick around if anybody has any questions, but I know lunch beckons as well.